Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to join the webinar. As usual, we're going to give people just a couple moments in order to collect themselves in the meeting room, and then we'll get going in earnest at that point. Okay, all right. Well, we're going to get started. So far, kind of a light group for the webinar, but that's okay. We're going to get started anyway so that we make hay. And obviously, for those who haven't attended previously, we will be recording these and they will be posted for participants to be able to view at a later date. So welcome everybody to the Building Smart Energy Efficiency Essentials for Modern Homes series. My name is Chris McTaggart. I have been your frequent host here of these series of webinars that we've been conducting since May, and they will run through November on basically how to up our games in the state of Michigan for building higher performance homes. And so today we're going to kind of take a little bit of an overview of a program that I'm sure many of you have heard of, but you aren't an expert in, which is the Energy Star Single Family New Homes Program. So this is just kind of a broad overview. We will be going into more specifics in subsequent webinars. But again, of course, much of thanks and appreciation to our sponsors for this series, DTE and Consumers Energy. So, basically today, the goal is really just kind of to understand what Energy Star is and what it isn't. Guess what? It's more than appliances. That's right. Energy Star is not just for your refrigerator and clothes washer. There is a whole home labeling program that has a variety of different certification criteria. And it's not just related to what kind of appliances you put in the house. That is a feature, but not necessarily the only one. So what are those distinguishing features of Energy Star single family new homes? And how do you go through the certification process? And, I just want to go ahead and preface this all to say, Energy Star single family new homes is still a program. As of this presentation today, we still have an EPA Energy Star program. And the last I heard, the people that make decisions at the federal government level have come to realize that there is sufficient stakeholder interest in having a federally managed Energy Star program. So obviously, those things are subject to change potentially, but for now, this is a program and it is active and it will be for the foreseeable future. So that's why we're here teaching you about it, so you can learn about it. All right, so again, I'm Chris McTaggart. I'm the president of Building Efficiency Resources, aka BER, or the Bear. We are a national quality assurance and educational provider for primarily residential and multifamily new construction builds, focused on pretty much energy code compliance all the way to passive house and beyond. We work with about 500 certified resident professionals all around the country under our umbrella, with many of them based in the state of Michigan. I myself am from Michigan. I'm from Detroit, hometown boy here. Came back after getting my career started elsewhere, and I am excited to be presenting this series because I care about my home state. I've got a big invested interest in it, and having better performing homes that keep people comfortable and have stable utility bills is absolutely imperative to the future of Michigan. So that's why we're here having this conversation. Okay, so in previous webinars, and again, I don't want to assume that everybody's been in all of them, but we've sort of started by just kind of introducing people to what high performance building practices are, ranging from design principles like building envelope construction, insulation, air sealing, fenestration, mechanical systems, ventilation. Then we talked about using the HERS index as a design tool to be able to help up our games within the residential construction sector. And so beyond doing a HERS index rating, there are a variety of above code programs or third-party energy efficiency programs that leverage the HERS index as a tool for achieving compliance with those programs. And Energy Star single family new homes program is kind of like the most fundamental next step that one might take after getting a HERS index rating on a home. Energy Star is about better than code performance, 10 to 15% better than code. So it's not necessarily a huge departure from typical modern construction practices or code built construction practices, but it does contain both um, improvements in the energy performance as defined by a HERS index score, as well as a variety of mandatory criteria in order for a home to meet the certification criteria. So it is a multi-step, multi-variable program. It's not a gimme. It definitely, there are elements to the program that builders and tradespeople and even some energy raters may have to collaborate on prior to engaging in, because it may be a little bit different than standards of practice. And so we'll be going over that both today as well as in subsequent webinars. So, Energy Star overall, again, you've probably seen Energy Star on your refrigerator or dishwasher or other types of domestic appliances, possibly on some consumer electronics like computers. Um, there obviously are also Energy Star labeled building products. So, like, there's Energy Star windows or Energy Star insulation materials. So Energy Star is a big top EPA-based program for higher performance products, but it also has a whole other buildings category. There's program categories for homes, for multifamily buildings, manufactured homes, commercial buildings, and even industrial buildings. We're not at all going to be touching on those later categories of buildings, commercial or industrial, because those programs are quite a bit different than the homes-based programs. But in essence, the idea behind Energy Star homes is that we're getting better than code. Again, this is a improvement over baseline building practices as defined by energy code compliance. It's not necessarily meant to be a dramatic departure from building business as usual in a way that we might expect with a passive house, for example. And I keep saying that word passive house, and you might be saying, well, I don't know what that is. Check in with us in a few weeks, because we're sequentially kind of building in this webinar series from kind of code, then HERS ratings, then Energy Star, then zero energy ready homes, and then passive house is one of the higher tiers of building performance programs that one can participate in. So Energy Star is kind of like that next step. A HERS rating, getting a HERS rating done is better than just code compliance because it is more third-party verified and defined performance on the home. But beyond that, Energy Star takes it even another step further. So this kind of gives you an idea of how to look at this. So Energy Star has had for their single family homes program a variety of versions in the history of the program. We are currently in Michigan in version 3.1. That's the minimum compliance threshold for participation in Energy Star single family homes in Michigan. So if you see here in kind of the dead center of the chart, version 3.1 is attempting to be about 10% better than the 2012 through 2018 IECC. And so that kind of makes sense because if you saw previous series, we talked about energy code compliance and HERS index scores potentially relative to baseline Michigan energy code compliance. And we found that the Michigan performance home, like a worst case scenario, could be somewhere in the 80s on the HERS index and still meet code. Again, not for the purpose of demonstrating code, but just the equivalent HERS index of a minimally compliant home following the performance path of code. Maybe somewhere there in the 80s. Again, we talked about Michigan's performance code has some weakening amendments. In a lot of ways, it makes it closer to the 2009 IECC, which is why we see that, 2009 IECC, sort of HERS index thresholds were somewhere in probably the 80s to 70s, something like that. So when Energy Star version 3, this sort of family of the new version of single family programs came out, the idea was to be 10% better than the 2009 IECC. That put us in the 75 to the 65 realm on the index score. Then when version 3.1 came out, that was an attempt to basically up the game of Energy Star, given that the 2012 through 2018 codes were higher performance than the 2009 IECC. So whereas complying minimally with 2012 through 2018 might put you somewhere in the 75 to 65 realm, something like that. On the index score, Energy Star version 3.1, you're going to have to be somewhere in the mid 60s to mid 50s in order to get in the game with Energy Star version 3.1. We have continued to move the needle in terms of energy code stringency in this country. The 2021 IECC is a pretty big jump forward. You might expect HERS index scores somewhere in the 50s to 60s for 2021 compliance. And so in relation to that, version 3.2 is a jump ahead, somewhere in the 40s to 50s on the index. And the version 3.3 is in relation to the 2024 IECC, which again is incrementally better than 2021. And so we may likely see index scores for version 3.3 in probably the low 50s to mid 40s for compliance. So this is the goal, is there's kind of always this delta of getting a little bit better than the version of code. You may say, well, if version 3.3 exists, why don't I have to meet that in Michigan? Well, because the EPA has essentially defined that our code should, essentially they moved the whole needle for the Energy Star program nationally up to version 3.1. We may very well have an energy code that from a performance standpoint performs like the 2009, but basically Energy Star as a program decided if you're going to participate in Energy Star, you have to at least get to 3.1 nationally. So in comparison, like our neighbors over in Illinois, they have a code that's on 2021 IUCC. So they would have to meet version 3.2 if you were building a home in that state, because their baseline code is the 2021 IUCC. So eventually, Michigan most likely may catch up and have yet another more stringent energy code. And at that time, then a more advanced version of Energy Star may become mandatory in the state, but that's not the case today. However, it's important to note if you're trying to participate in the 45L tax credit, which is still eligible for homes that are acquired as of the end of June of next year, you have to get in with at least version 3.2, if not version 3.3. Okay, so I know that was a lot to talk over, and so let's go over it again. Again, version 3 family of programs is what we're in. Prior to version 3, there was a version 2 of the program. That was for basically homes somewhere in the sort of the mid 2000s, 2006 until about 2012. And then prior to that was a version 1, and version 1 was quite a bit different. There was less mandatory requirements, and there wasn't a HERS index. It was actually a HERS score, which was the inverse. 100 was the best, whereas under the HERS index, 0 is the best, because that means a zero energy home. So we won't worry about this too much. This is kind of more about just the history of the program, but this is kind of what we see. So, version 3 came out in 2012, became sort of the mandatory program version. Again, that was in response to the 2009 IECC. Version 3.1 came out a couple of years later in response to 2012 through 2018, so on and so forth. Okay, so the benefits of Energy Star is that Energy Star is a pretty widely recognized consumer-facing label. Consumers understand that Energy Star, that sticker, that blue sticker, stands for enhanced energy performance. And consumers largely trust and elect to pursue Energy Star products due to that brand awareness. So, for a home builder, if you're trying to create a marketing edge for your product, electing to do Energy Star can really help because something like 80 or 90% of consumers are aware of the label. Now, not every consumer necessarily understands there's a single family new homes program, so there is an educational component, but they do understand the label, and largely consumers believe in the label. They believe that buying an Energy Star home is going to mean that they have lower bills and more comfort. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with Energy Star: lower bills, increase comfort. Also, a benefit of the builder is some of the quality control checks that are mandatory to the program will have the potential to reduce callbacks. So, making the home more well insulated, with properly installed insulation, as well as properly air sealed, so we don't have drafts in the home, is going to help to make sure that people feel more comfortable in their home. Having HVAC equipment that is properly installed with sealed ductwork that's designed for the home and not just sort of the largest unit that happened to be on the truck at the time that the HVAC contractor was there, and then properly set up or commissioned. These are all value propositions so that, you as a builder, once you sell the home, generally speaking, there's a 12-month warranty period. Ideally, you would not want to have any callbacks, right? You sell it to the consumer, you don't want to hear back from them. You want them to be comfortable because that means that they're satisfied in their home, and you don't have to basically go back and do any maintenance on behalf of the customer to make them happy. Other things about the program, obviously, part of the reason why we're talking about it is there are utility incentives here in the state of Michigan through DTE and Consumers Energy's New Homes program. So that's part of why we're talking about Energy Star. Is we'd like every builder to participate in Energy Star because the utilities find that there's a lot of value in those programs. There are federal tax credits for now. The 45L tax credit will expire for homes that are acquired. Basically, anything after the end of June 2026 doesn't look like there's going to be a tax credit after then. But if you're able to basically get going and wrap up some homes within the next handful of months, you potentially will be eligible for a tax credit. Talk to your accountant to make sure that it applies, though, to your construction. Um, Environmental responsibilities help home buyers, basically, some, not every home buyer, but some do care about the environment. And the idea that they have a home that is going to consume less energy and therefore create less pollution has a benefit to homeowners who have that as a sort of an ethical imperative. So again, that's maybe not everybody, but that's, I think, a certain subsect of the population cares enough to vote with their dollars to be able to choose to have an Energy Star home because they know that it's going to use less energy, and that's good for the planet. So how do you get up and running with Energy Star? So it's a free program to participate in, whether you're a rater or a builder. Basically, as a builder, you can get signed up on the EPA's website. You work with a certified rater, and that gives you access to all the Energy Star logos and how to brand yourself. There is a orientation that you have to watch so that you are aware of everything that goes into being an Energy Star partner and how the program works, but it's pretty lightweight in the scheme of things. And again, it is free to sign up for. Electing to select, who your HERS rater is, basically, the rater is typically going to do a preliminary energy model that's usually called projected HERS rating. And they're going to ensure that your plans and specifications are set up to meet Energy Star. And then once the home appears to be Energy Star compliant per the energy model, there's 2 on-site inspections that occur as standard in order to verify what we refer to as all minimum rated features, as well as program mandatory requirements. Those inspections happen pre-drywall, post-cavity wall installation, and then at final, once the home is substantially complete. Once all that data is collected, a final energy model, typically referred to as a confirmed rating, is generated in order to confirm that the home still meets Energy Star's requirements. There are a series of checklists that must be filled out in order to document compliance fully. And then the home gets registered with a home certification organization. The most sort of popular HCO is ResNet. ResNet works with a series of accredited providers which perform quality assurance oversight of HERS ratings and Energy Star homes. And so after all that's done, then basically the rater can print out documentation that the home was fully certified, and it can be registered with the utility programs so that the builder can receive incentive monies associated with those homes. Energy Star single family homes program is geared towards low-rise construction, really single family, detached, and attached. So detached single family homes, duplexes, and townhomes. The program used to apply up to apartment buildings up to 5 stories. That has shifted as of a handful of years ago, and there is now a dedicated multifamily new construction program that really deals with apartment buildings of all sizes. So again, I mentioned that there is more to this program than simply doing a HERS index score. There are a variety of mandatory checklists that have to be completed in order to have a satisfactorily complete Energy Star home. So Energy Star is a combination of energy performance proven by the HERS index plus mandatory requirements as documented on the checklists. That's how it works. So there's a rater design review checklist that's using the plans and specifications from the builder, as well as the HVAC design report that's submitted by whomever is doing the HVAC design. Oftentimes, that's the mechanical contractor who will be installing the heating and cooling equipment, but it could also be a third party. The rater also has a field checklist that documents things like insulation installation quality, air sealing and air barriers, as well as HVAC testing. And then finally, the installing HVAC contractor has the option to complete the commissioning checklist to ensure that the heating and cooling equipment were properly set up at final. But there is also an alternative compliance path for the rater to substantially document these items using ResNet HVAC grading procedures. Okay, so tips for builders. Ideally, it'd be great if you went through with your rater all these checklists just to make sure that you have all of the items documented, because there are some things that could alter your design. Let me give an example of this. So, and it's not just about insulation. So Energy Star requires fresh air ventilation. You have to have mechanical whole house ventilation. That can be done with exhaust, supply, or balanced systems. But let's say that you're doing it with either a supply or a balanced system. The fresh air intake has to be a minimum of 2 feet above grade or above the roof deck to comply with Energy Star. Why? Well, because there's the concern that snow or plantings could possibly build up into that fresh air intake if it's too close to the ground. So let's imagine a scenario where we're building a home that is on a conditioned basement, and the HVAC equipment is in the basement, and the basement is substantially below grade. It is, an 8-foot tall basement, and 6 feet of it is below grade and 2 feet is above grade. That's a pretty standard configuration in Michigan. Well, if your HVAC equipment is in the basement and your walls are only 2 feet above grade, you got to make sure that your fresh air ventilation then is coming out that rim joist, most likely, in order to ensure that that fresh air intake is at least 2 feet above grade. Well, what happens if your house is actually, 1.5 feet above grade, instead of 2 feet? Well, then you might have a problem. There could be a challenge meeting that mandatory requirement, and you may have to create an alternate design to meet the program criteria. So that's just an example of something that could possibly trip you up. Another example is that Energy Star requires grade 1 installed insulation, which is basically a more or less perfect cavity wall installation for insulation. And let's say that you're used to using fiberglass bats, because that's what your insulation installer likes to use. That's the most affordable product they can offer you. The challenge with fiberglass bats is they can be prone to moderate to significant installation defects, either through not cutting them to fit into the cavity properly, they're not spliced properly around wires or other penetrations. So the challenge is, you can potentially, be penny wise but pound foolish by potentially making a decision to go with a product without at least having the conversation with your installer that you're going to expect them to bring their A game. You are paying for grade 1 installation, and you have to hold them to that standard, because otherwise the rater may be, put in an unenviable position of having to tell you that, your insulation wasn't installed properly, and you're going to have to hold back on drywall until it's fixed. The raters hate having that conversation. Builders hate hearing it. So these are the kinds of things you'd want to, integrate from the checklist into your construction workflow early, and having these meetings with the appropriate professionals can really do a lot in order to make sure we don't have unintended consequences further on down the line. Again, check the version of the program that you're supposed to participate in, for most of the country, we can see we are on version 3.1. So here in Michigan, we don't see a code change anytime soon, seemingly in Michigan. And so we should probably have the assurance that we're going to be on version 3.1. But what happens if you want to do the tax credit? Well, then you got to do at least version 3.2 or version 3.3. We can see there are some states that are already on version 3.2 or are in a transition to version 3.2. And then California and the tropics have their own defined program, which are quite a bit different than our national version. So again, our baseline program that you're going to be participating, version 3.1, you should anticipate PERS index scores somewhere in the mid 50s to mid 60s. If you're going to do the tax credit, you have to get in with either version 3.2 or version 3.3. You're going to be somewhere in the 45 to 55 realm. We did mention at one point there is an all-electric next gen program, and we will be talking about that here in the near future. But it's similar to version 3.2 in terms of relative performance. Through DTE and Consumers Energy, both utilities give a bonus incentive for meeting Energy Star. So honestly, if you want to get in with the best incentives through the utilities, you should plan for your home to achieve compliance with Energy Star. And again, if you're a spec builder, you can then parlay that into the tax credit as well. And so, you could be getting up to $6,500 per home potentially through consumers if you were all electric with the heat pump or geothermal and pursuing the federal tax credit. So big things here through the utilities. There is a pilot program through consumers that you have to have already been locked in. So the cutoff was earlier this summer to get locked in for this pilot program, but consumers has been offering bonus incentives for Energy Star Next Gen, DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes, and Passive House. Again, the 45L tax credit, $2,500 per home. You have to meet version 3.2 or 3.3. And again, I would say talk to your accountant because it's really meant primarily for speculative builders, not necessarily for pre-sold. It's whoever owns the basis in the construction is allowed to claim the credit technically. So if you're doing like a custom home, I think there's a good question about whether or not you actually have the basis in that. But I am not an accountant, and therefore I'm not going to tell you how to do your taxes, but you should talk to your accountant about that. Through DTE, there is the opportunity to get a bonus incentive as well for Energy Star, either $300 or $350 for doing Energy Star. So both of these utilities understand the value that Energy Star brings to the table in making the home more comfortable, more resilient, and having overall better performance. And the reason why that is, the HERS index is great, but as we talked about in previous lessons, the HERS index, it kind of gives you many different paths to success. And that sounds great, but there's also a scenario where maybe the home isn't very airtight. Maybe it doesn't have really tight ducts. Maybe the insulation is just okay, but you're still able to end up with a better HERS score because of other elements. You may still have an efficient home, but it may not be as comfortable or resilient as an Energy Star home, which has a lot more mandatory requirements. HERS ratings don't have mandatory requirements. It's just an asset rating on the home. My home that I'm sitting in right now, presenting to you, built in 1927. I've made a lot of improvements, but I could score it on the HERS index the day I bought it when it had zero insulation, zero air sealing, and bad mechanical systems and bad windows, to all the way to today where, I've made improvements basically across the board. I could score it, no matter what. But with Energy Star, we know that there is more of a comprehensive approach to building performance that should, if done right, result in better performing, more comfortable homes. So with that being said, what are those key elements of Energy Star? So comfort. Basically, we're trying to do code compliance plus. Think about it that way. Energy Star is not some crazy virtue signaling program that is just completely off the rails. It is not going to put you out of business to try to build an Energy Star home. Think about it as code plus. You start with the energy code and you get a little bit better, 10% better than that in terms of efficiency, and then you have 8 key features. And those 8 key features are really, a complete thermal enclosure system, which means having a air sealed enclosure with proper air barriers and properly installed insulation of sufficient quantity. There is a minimum performance for the building enclosure, but it's not necessarily anything completely out of the normal in terms of, compared to how we do business here in Michigan, at least under version 3.1. We want to make sure that HVAC systems are properly sized for the home. So, manual J and S calculations to predict the loads, and then select the appropriately sized system, and then install the ductwork per a professional duct design. That's the goal here, because we want HVAC systems that work. We don't want to just throw in gratuitously oversized or alternatively undersized systems that aren't going to perform for the home. And then, we also make sure that, bedrooms are properly balanced. So when you're using forced air heating and cooling systems, if you don't make it, not every home has bedrooms with dedicated returns. In Michigan, a lot of people do choose to do that. They choose to put in both a supply and a return in a bedroom. That's not necessarily required, though. It's not a standard of practice, but we do want to make sure that we're supplying air into the bedroom, that stale, cold, cooler air, once it cools off, is able to head back to the return, so it can make its way back to the HVAC system unencumbered. So we make sure that bedrooms are pressure balanced to ensure proper distribution of heated and cooled air throughout the home. For air quality, we make sure that there is a whole house ventilation system, as well as local mechanical exhaust systems for kitchens and bathrooms that function and meet minimum airflow rates. And we make sure that our heating and cooling system has at least decent filtration on it with a MERV 6 filter installed. And then we want to make sure that we're not creating any combustion safety hazards inside the home. The program used to have water management system requirements that help to determine the water management and durability of the home. That element has been removed, although I still highly recommend that builders consider keeping a copy of those water management guidelines, because they brought, I think, a lot of value to the program. Because it doesn't matter how airtight your home is or how good your ventilation is, if you have moisture issues, then you got a bigger problem in the home. So, okay, so in terms of ERI targets, or ERI is essentially a generic term for a HERS index score. The program uses ERI because not every home is certified under ResNet's HERS system. There are other home certification organizations that are permitted to be used for Energy Star under the EPA. So ERI essentially means HERS rating. It's just a different, more generic way to refer to the score. Version 3.1, again, somewhere in the mid 50s to mid 60s. Version 3.2, mid 40s to mid 50s. And then version 3.3, you're going to have a hard time getting in the door above a 50 more than likely. Depends on the home plan. So again, the score varies depending on the home plan, and there can be a variety of different sort of comparison values that occur. But essentially, whatever the reference home is, which meets a specification as defined by the EPA for that version of the program, that home gets scored, and then we compare it to our as-built home or to-be-built home, and we have to have a lower score than that reference home. So that's how it works. So if we're doing Energy Star in Michigan, And our reference home HERS index target is a 60 on the HERS index. We would have to get at least a 60 in our energy model, if not even better, in order to basically have a home that will achieve compliance with the program under version 3.1. So here's an example. So somebody's pursuing the tax credit. And so the target for version 3.2 is a 52. The home must be less than or equal to a 52. So this is showing, wow, a 25. That's a very efficient home. You probably have some solar panels on that house possibly to get you there, but regardless, that's a very, very efficient home, and it is better than that 52 on the index. So again, here's that reference design criteria. Here's the big deal about the reference design. People get this confused all the time. They think that by the reference design existing, that means that the home has to have all of these individual items mandatorily. So for example, under this table, heating and cooling systems, and we're in climate zone 5, which is the majority of Michigan, people see this and they think that they have to have a 95 AFUE gas furnace in order to participate in Energy Star. That's not true. You could have a 90% gas furnace, and that's fine because the reference home will have a 95. So you may be losing a little bit of efficiency versus the reference home heating system efficiency, but that's fine because that's what the HERS index score and the HERS index target procedure is for. And so, it's not that, you don't have to meet every one of these individual items. You do not have to have R60 in the attic. That's what the reference home has. So you have to meet it or beat it, but you don't have to, in terms of how the whole home scores, you don't have to actually get to each individual item. That's not how the program works. The other thing that is worth noting is that Energy Star products are not required. Again, the reference home, if we go all the way down to the bottom, for refrigerators, dishwashers, and ceiling fans, the reference design has Energy Star equivalent specifications for the reference home, but that doesn't mean you have to install an Energy Star fridge, dishwasher, or ceiling fan. Well, why not? Well, number one, not every builder installs appliances. Sometimes homes come without appliances installed, and it's up to the homeowner to furnish their own appliances. So this is just to say that an Energy Star reference design contains the equivalent efficiency of Energy Star appliances, but you don't have to install them. In fact, you don't have to have any Energy Star labeled equipment at all to achieve Energy Star single family homes, with one exception. If you have whole house ventilation provided by a bath fan, then those bath fans have to be Energy Star. That's the only time that Energy Star labeled products are actually required in an Energy Star certified home. It can help you get there, obviously, because Energy Star products tend to be more efficient, but that's the only time you actually have to put them in. So again, walking through what are the key imperatives: proper air barriers and air sealing, grade 1 insulation installation, windows that are at least a minimum level of performance, and there were reduced thermal bridging requirements in the program. Now you get credit for those elements. It's not actually mandatory, but it is considered. So the amount of framing that we have in our wall system is a consideration within Energy Star, although no longer a requirement as of version or revision 14 of the program. We can get credit for properly installed HVAC systems. Basically, you have to have properly installed HVAC systems. It just depends on how you're going to prove it. You can get essentially extra credit on your index score if you have your rater do HVAC grading. And so basically, grade 1 or grade 2 HVAC installation through the HVAC grading procedure is permitted to be used, or alternatively, using a credentialed HVAC contractor and them completing a commissioning checklist is also allowed. Again, bedroom comfort vents. Basically, that's just making sure that we have balanced bedroom heat and cooling distribution. So we do that usually through either dedicated returns, jumper ducts, or door undercuts. Um, Fresh air ventilation system. So, we're showing here a ERV. You don't have to have an ERV in an Energy Star home, although we would recommend it and certainly get more credit for it. You're allowed to have exhaust only ventilation, supply ventilation, or balanced ventilation, and all of those will work. And so the whole thing is to make sure that it's properly sized for the home in question and that it is tested. We have to test the ventilation to make sure that it meets the design amount within a reasonable threshold of compliance. Oh, uh, local mechanical exhaust. So bath fans and kitchen exhaust fans have to meet a minimum airflow rate. And, depending on how they are set up, they may actually have to meet some type of requirement for sound. So I mentioned about having Energy Star bath fans if you're using local mechanical exhaust as a continuous whole house ventilation product. Basically you have to meet a low sound requirement that comes out of the Energy Star specification. Why? Because nobody wants to hear a bath fan that's loud running all the time. That would be extremely obnoxious, even if it moves sufficient air. Filters need to be, a minimum, MERV rating. You have to have MERV 6 filters, and we're supposed to gasket those filter slots. Why? Well, because frankly speaking, it is inappropriate just to have a completely sealed duct system except for where the filter exists, because you just have a complete bypass in that area. And especially if the home is in a garage, or if it's if the HVAC system's in a garage or an attic or a crawl space, you'd be sucking in a lot of air that we'd prefer not to be putting into the home. Combustion safety. We got to make sure that we're putting in safer gas-fired systems, safer natural gas, propane, and oil-fired systems. So these systems have to be either power vented type of systems, or at least direct vent type of systems, if not sealed combustion. We do not want to rely on atmospherically vented equipment. Why? Because there can be issues of backdrafting of that equipment, or that those atmospheric vents get blocked, leading to potential issues of combustion gases entering the home and causing a safety issue for the homeowner. Okay, so that's the key criteria. And again, we're going to go through all those items in individual sort of, specificity over subsequent webinars. But the certification process essentially works like this. First of all, both the rater and the builder have to join Energy Star. If the rater is going to do HVAC grading, the installing HVAC contractor does not have to be an Energy Star partner. However, if the HVAC contractor is going to do its own HVAC commissioning work, then the HVAC contractor also has to be credentialed through a Energy Star HVAC credentialing organization. But regardless, the builder definitely has to be, and the rater definitely has to be. And as a builder, you have to make sure you're selecting a HERS rater who is an Energy Star rater. Energy Star, not every HERS rater is an Energy Star rater. You have to, as a rater, you have to go through training and to take an exam in order to document that you actually understand the program. There is a design review completed by the rater, followed by field verification, and then labeling and certification follow thereafter. So earlier the better in terms of getting in with a HVAC, with a Energy Star rater so that you can go through that design review process. Why? Because it's possible that a builder is not used to having their HVAC contractor do HVAC design. There's a lot of HVAC contractors that, they've been doing this for 30 years and they just kind of go and select a unit and they throw it in. They base the size of the unit on the square footage of the home, and they're not used to their ductwork being tested. Well, that's a recipe for disaster for Energy Star. That's why it's better to get in with the rater early, go through the program with the rater, understand what's unique about the program, and make sure that you got your bases covered in terms of all that extra Energy Star specific criteria. Again, the rater is going to do at least 2 site visits, a pre-drywall and a final, and then there's going to be once they complete that, they're going to true up the energy model, make sure it still passes Energy Star, make sure all their checklists are complete, submit it to their provider for QA, and then you'll be able to have a labeled home. So again, we talked about this earlier, sooner the better. Earlier you get in with your trades and the rater, the better. Coordinating with your HVAC contractor especially. I'll say here in Michigan too, maybe especially in Michigan. My experience is that HVAC contractors are not used to having their ductwork pressure tested to document that they're properly sealed. There's also a very significant utilization in the marketplace of site-built returns, or AKA panned returns, where floor joists or wall cavities are used as return ductwork. While that is permitted by the program, it's difficult to get those panned returns to be really well sealed. And so there's a high probability of failure if you're using panned returns and you don't have the HVAC contractor really focusing on treating them as a duct and sealing them completely on all 6 sides to make sure that you're not going to end up having leakage. Big things you have to schedule properly with your rater too. If you go ahead and drywall your house before the rater can view the insulation, you can't label the home as Energy Star. Why? Because the rater has to inspect the home before drywall for air sealing details as well as insulation installation quality. You have to be able to give the rater time to document that those things were done, or else the home cannot meet Energy Star. So again, collaboration is key. You're the builder, you're sort of the ultimate champion of this process. The rater can do a lot, but they can't make your trades perform. You have to communicate with your trades that Energy Star is a specific program, it has specific requirements, and the trades really have to work with the rater in order to ensure that you're achieving the program. None of this is really genius work. Install sealed ductwork. Guess what? That's code. You're supposed to seal ductwork per code. Install insulation properly. Guess what? That's code as well. Insulation is supposed to be installed per manufacturer's recommendations, which are essentially grade 1. Install HVAC systems and commission them properly. Guess what? That is also code. Have properly performing ventilation systems. That is also code. Have air barrier and air sealing in the home. Guess what? That is also code. So a lot of this stuff is just verifying that it was actually done. So very little about Energy Star is exotic or unique, but documenting that process may be, unique and a first time for a tradesperson to have to go through, basically proving their product. So that's kind of the Energy Star process. I guess today's presentation, man, I got through it kind of quickly, so I'm happy to take any questions, but if not, we'll just hang out here for a little while. But we will have subsequent lessons that go into a deeper dive on the specific requirements for Energy Star relating to the building enclosure and HVAC systems. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody coming in to attend today. Wow, today's the first time that I've done one of these where I'm not racing to exactly noon. So I'm grateful that we had the right amount of material and not too much, but happy to take any questions if anybody has it. Okay, well, seeing no questions here, I appreciate everybody's attendance, and you will get even more information about the Energy Star Single Family Homes Program with our next webinar. I'm going to go ahead and, well, we got one person that when chimed in, they just said thank you. Somebody did ask a question. Does pan ductwork disqualify a home for EPA's Indoor Air Plus program? And historically, it did. They have since modified the program language within the version 2 of Indoor Air Plus so that pan ductwork by itself is not necessarily disqualifying. That's a very good question. Thank you, Christopher, because that is a very good question. Historically, Indoor Air Plus did, in fact, disqualify a home if you had pan ductwork. It's no longer absolutely the case any longer. We will have a whole session that is dedicated just to EPA's Indoor Air Plus. Very important question if a builder is trying to add Indoor Air Plus to their home, which can have a lot of benefits of just selling better air quality to consumers. Or alternatively, if the builder is trying to go all the way to zero energy ready homes, which requires EPA's Indoor Air Plus program be met. So very good question, Christopher, and I appreciate you asking that. Patrick, thanks as always. Nick, thanks as always. And yeah, we'll get you next time there, Nick. Um, and okay, I feel like we've answered all the questions, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.